Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive! This week, I continue my video series on BattleTech by talking about the first two of the great houses that I'm going to talk about in the three-part series talking about the great houses of the Inner Sphere. I'm doing this in three parts, mostly because there's just so much to cover with each one, even just giving them a surface skim. And I'm not even going to be talking about their respective detailed histories, that I realized it would just be too huge of a video to do in one part, or even really two parts. So, this week, I am starting with the Lyran Commonwealth, or House Steiner, and the Draconis Combine, House Kurita. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we talk about Fist and Dragon. So the Lyran Commonwealth was formed officially in 2341, and it was a merger between three mercantile alliances: the Protectorate of Donegal, the Federation of Sky, and the Tamar Pact. Originally, it was supposed to have 9 archons ruling the nation, but this proved to be impractical, and the leader of the Protectorate of Donegal, Robert Marsden, led a coup and declared himself essentially the Supreme Archon, the Archon Basilius, on August of 2375. And there was an invasion by the Draconis Combine in 2407 that led to the death of the then Archon Alistair Marsden, Robert Marsden's brother. And in 2408, rule fell to Alistair Marsden's wife, Catherine Steiner, on the capital of Tharcad. Now, this is where things get a little interesting. First off, this is where the dynasty changes from Marsden to Steiner. But it's a little bit more than just that. The first Catherine Steiner makes a decision. She wants to prop up her reign, because the Archon could still be voted out by someone else, and she wanted to bring about stability. So, first thing she did is she created the Commonwealth Council. It was something specifically to secure support from the leaders of the Tamar Pact and Federation of Sky. Then, she sent out the Lyran Scouting Corps, found a large number of worlds, and gave them to people who were kind of on the fence of whether they should support her or not. You know, ye old let's buy loyalty trick. And that led to the history of the Steiner dynasty controlling the Lyran Commonwealth. Now, what's interesting is the Archon holds their position not by force of arms or intimidation, but by their wealth. The example is in 3025, House Steiner directly controlled the 4 worlds closest to Tharcad, and had major land holdings on 2 other worlds, and controlling shares in at least 50 Lyran corporations. So this means House Steiner, it's got the money to leverage to get stuff done. And the Commonwealth Council of course, sort of acts as a middleman between the Archon and the Estates General. Essentially, the Commonwealth Council works like this. The Estates General passes a law. It goes up to the Commonwealth Council, who then debate it to determine whether or not they're going to pass it on to the Archon. And then the Archon, when a legislation comes up to him or her, most Archons have been women, interestingly enough. When the Archon receives the legislation, they get to decide whether to approve it or not. Ultimately, the Archon has absolute authority. Sort of. But we'll get to that in a moment. The purpose of the Archon is to be the guiding hand of the Lyran Commonwealth, as well as the commander-in-chief of the Lyran Commonwealth Armed Forces. Unlike in the real world, this means that a requirement to be Archon is to actually have served in the military in some capacity. This means most Archons have some military training. It might be infantry training, it might be tank training, but more often than not, most Archons know how to pilot the kings of the battlefield, the BattleTech. Oh, and traditionally, behind the throne of the Lyran Archon stood 2 Griffin BattleTechs. But, as I mentioned, the Estates General is sort of it started off as a advisory body. You know, basically going a place where worlds could air their grievances to the Archon. But it eventually grew more powerful over the years. And there's strict rules who govern who can sit on the council. No member of the nobility higher than a baron, nor a person convicted of a major crime in the last 15 years can serve on the Estates General. And during their time on the Estates General, all of their personal property must be placed into a blind trust. Now, there are some delegates who are representing worlds that have been occupied by a foreign power. Yes, that's right. Worlds that are not technically in the Lyran Commonwealth still have representatives because they were invaded. The homeless, as they're called, are, well, they get to live in Tharkad City, and the Archon, him or herself, pays for their living arrangements. The Estates General meet every year in the spring for a 4-month session, though if it needs to, it can go a little bit longer. They have a Speaker of the Assembly who guides, the itinerary and the discussion of the Assembly. And the Estates General has a power it's only ever used one time. In 3007, they held a vote of no confidence against Archon Alessandro Steiner. And he resigned, rather than get a bunch of people who've probably been in the military to come and make him resign. But for the most part, between the Archon, the Council, and the Estates General, they work to find compromises to work for the betterment of the Lyran people. The Lyrans, there's also a bit of a joke about the Lyrans. The Lyrans have one of the most important and largest mech factories in the Inner Sphere. The world of Hesperus. Note, yes, there are multiple mech companies that have sections on Hesperus. Specifically Hesperus 2. But this world was a old Star League factory. And until they actually learned how to do it, was a black box factory. But this world produces some of the heaviest mechs in the Inner Sphere. It produces Atlases, Atlas 2s. I believe the Fafnir is produced there. I know Devastators are. And it produces a huge swath of 100-ton and even a smattering of 90 and 95-ton mechs. This has led to the joke about the Lyran Commonwealth and House Steiner. What do you call a Lyran Scout mech? A Zeus. It's an 80-ton mech, the lowest tier of the assaults. And it's kind of a joke, but at the same time, the Lyrans do field more assault mechs, more heavy mechs, than any other house. With the exception of some mechs like the Commando and the Hollander, the Lyrans don't field that many mainline light mechs. They tend to field medium mechs where other houses field light mechs. They field heavy mechs where other houses field mediums. They field 80 and 85-ton mechs where other houses field heavies, and then they field a lot more assaults. A lot more of the 90, 95, and 100-ton mechs. But that's the Lyran Commonwealth in a nutshell. They are a mercantile power. They trade with everyone. And now, let's take a look at their exact opposite. The Draconis Combine. The Draconis Combine was founded in 2319 by Shiro Kurita with an alliance between the worlds of New Samarkand and Galadon. And from there, everything went interesting. The Draconis Combine is a military state. The military is, in fact, the highest part of their social order. The coordinator himself has served in the military, usually as a mech warrior after the development of mechs. And, in fact, in the battle for Luthien during the clan invasion, House Kurita in his 80s and a bunch of 80 to 90-year-old warriors defended the royal palace on Luthien themselves and fought like crazy, actually pushed back and just did more damage than they inflicted, despite having outdated mechs fighting against the top of the line clan forces, including the Smoke Jaguar Keshik. But the Draconis Combine is built on a idea of that there are 5 pillars that hold up society. The first of these pillars is the Pillar of Jade. Commerce. I should point out, this is not the first in importance. This is the first I'm talking about. The Pillar of Jade is... Well, the Draconis Combine has always been resource poor except for its people. So, it developed a form of state-run capitalism. The idea being every resource is exploited to the greatest degree it can. And, of course, you have commerce, but the commerce works towards supporting the state itself, especially the military. And there are basically 2 types of corporations. Manufacturers of weapons and mechs are direct service corporations. They get protection from military and economic threats. All other corporations, things that boost morale or provide what few meager luxuries the average civilian of the Draconis Combine gets, are indirect service. And they get the benefit that they have more control over their own affairs. But they have the downside that they've got to provide their own protection. Note that the Combine is not a communist economy. It is extremely controlled market capitalism. You want a new business? You gotta get permission from the government. And it's gonna be run under government supervision. But you're not gonna be told what you have to do. Or you're not gonna be given quotas. Unless you're a military corporation. And from the Pillar of Jade, you step up to the Pillar of Ivory. And basically this is the spiritual side of the Combine. The Dictum Honorarium and the Order of 5 Pillars all kind of push for this. The ideals of purity and harmony in the various forms. It's one thing to remember is the Draconis Combine has a veneer of 1980s Western stereotypes of the Japanese, but it's a pan-Asian culture. It incorporates some Korean, some Japanese, a lot of Western stereotype Japanese, and all these into forming its society. Confucianism and Taoism have been encouraged by the coordinator because they instill a sense of obligation to one's superiors. Zen Buddhism and Bushido are assigned to focus the warriors' minds, leave them free to do what they have to do during combat. And they kind of have a more extreme version of Confucianism that's indoctrinated into the middle class. The idea is this is going to ensure loyalty from all these middle class people, because loyalty is important. From the Pillar of Ivory, we move to the Pillar of Teak. And this is basically the class system, the society. You have the nobility, the warriors, the middle class and commoners, and then you have the yakuza at the very bottom. This is the pillar that incorporates the Japanese cultural traditions as seen from 1980s Americans. And it's not that they focus it to discriminate against non-Japanese, but if you don't embrace the traditions, you're not really going to get very far in the hierarchy. And then from the Pillar of Teak comes the Pillar of Steel, the military. And this pillar is the Draconis Combine mustered soldiery. As an expansionist country, an expansionist government that does this through military invasion, military expansion, the Pillar of Steel is probably one of the most important of the 5 pillars. But the true first pillar is the one I talk about last. This is the Pillar of Gold. The coordinator is the Pillar of Gold. Well, technically the government is the Pillar of Gold. But the coordinator is the Combine. The coordinator is the government. Except for a brief period, the coordinator has always been from House Kurita. There was a brief period where another family had the title, but they were all killed off. Like, literally. Any survivors were hunted down and murdered through any means necessary. But of course, the coordinator is the center of the government, and the coordinator doesn't run the day-to-day stuff. For that, you have a number of ministries. You have the Ministry of the Expansion of the Glories of the Draconis Combine, aka the Ministry of War. And guess what? Yep, that's the military. It also does a number of other functions. Department of Indoctrination, Bureau of Substitution, Assembly of the Grand Inquisitor, stuff like that. But for for the most part, the absolute core of it is the Draconis Combine Mustard Soldiery, DCMS. From there, you have the Ministry of Wealth and the Dispersing of Assets, the Ministry of the Treasury. And this is the organization, the ministry that makes sure the economy functions like it should. You know, you've got the Bureau of Nourishment, the Bureau of Human Growth, Bureau of Interstellar Trade, Bureau of Symbolic Assets, aka the Mint. The Bureau of Development of Treaty Brothers, which is specifically a trade liaison with House Merrick and House Liao. From there, we come into the Ministry of the Well-Being of the Land and the Peoples. The Ministry of the Interior. In essence, they cover anything none of the other ministries cover. Though they have some interesting little groups. The Bureau of General Indoctrination, aka the Education Department. Bureau of Health and Happiness, Medical Care. Bureau of Conservation and Salvage of Resources, Environmental and Recycling Concerns are just a handful of their sub-bureaus. The Ministry of Peaceful Order and Honor, or the Ministry of Justice. Yes, this is where you'll find your courts, such as the Hall of Swift Justice, the Criminal Court, the Machine of Peaceful Conflict Resolution, the Civil Court, the Guaranteed Honor for Kurita's Servants, the Noble Court. And, yes, here is where you find the Civilian Police, officially called the Civilian Guidance Corps, unofficially called the Friendly Persuaders. They don't have guns. They have batons. They know how to use those batons. They are very friendly at persuading people to obey the law, or to get into the handcuffs to be taken to jail. Of course, we then come to the Ministry of the Servants of the Draconis Combine. The Ministry of the Court, i.e., the Ministry of the Nobles. And it has basically everything to do with nobility and court functions. Bureau of Hospitality towards New Lands, which assigns governors to newly liberated planets. The Watchers of the Household, who run the Royal Palace. And the Keeper of the House Honor. This bureau is run officially by the Keeper of the Family Honor. It is also called the Order of the Five Pillars. The Order of the Five Pillars is one of the Draconis Combine's 2 intelligence agencies. And the Order of the Five Pillars can be called upon for government functionaries, if they know the right channels or have the right connections, just by asking the keeper of the family honor. But they primarily function on, well, preventing ideological threats, which is pretty much any form of invasion or any form of infiltration. They basically are a full-fledged intelligence agency looking for anything: disloyalty, external threats, that sort of thing. Next to them, competing with them, but not in the Ministry of Service of Draconis Combine, is the Internal Security Forces, the ISF. They also monitor for all sorts of threats, intelligence threats. Both groups will also conduct operations in other locations, like Davian, Steiner, Merrick, Liao, wherever they go. They compete against each other. It's kind of a weird setup, because it basically amounts to you have two of the best intelligence agencies of the Inner Sphere. And they're the best because they're fighting each other for the glory of finding the threats first. Now, sort of a pain in the dragon scales for many, many years is an organization called the Black Dragon Society. This is an ultra-conservative organization that believes that the Draconis Combine, even at its most conservative, has turned its back upon tradition. And they periodically try to fight coups, try to kill the coordinator, etc., etc. They've been purged several times, but ultimately they're kind of allowed to keep going because they serve a purpose in the Combine. They serve a purpose of keeping the coordinator sharp and provide a force for him or her, most coordinators have been men though, to focus on appeasing. Because, well, when you can die for making a bad choice or progressing too quickly, well, it kind of provides an incentive to moderate how much you change Combine society. And that is the quick overview of the Draconis Combine. Yes, this is a quick overview. There's a lot more I could go into. Next week, I will cover House Davian, the Federated Sons, and House Liao, the Capellan Confederation. Until then, I'd like you all to remember to have fun and keep gaming.